Crikey. When I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, you know, I really don't want to live in a Scotland where we think of ourselves as yes and no Scotland, where we think of ourselves as us and them. And obviously, you know, there's perilous lines we all cross on this. I was speaking to a friend on Saturday, and she said to me, she's a soft no voter, and she said to me, the trouble with all of you lot is, and I said, excuse me, just wind that sentence back a bit. You know, what is the all you lot? And she apologised, but you know, it's the perils of thinking of the world in that way. I think there is only one Scotland, and obviously then there's like millions and millions of Scotlands. That's the Scotland I'd like to live in, but we just have to be careful of that problem with all you lot. It's a time of surprises, I think, and a time of challenges. I do think there's history being made here and now, and that, you know, we'll look back to the summer of 2014 and say, you know, like a good Scottish Spike Lee film or something, and say, what were you doing in that summer? What did you know? What did you get up to? And hopefully it'll be stories we can tell our kids and our grandkids and future generations. And that's going to be something I'm going to kind of use a wee bit. I think very important. The story of the intergenerational accounts of Scotland and different activisms and different political intelligences in this debate, and it's something I think remarkable. And I think probably something we've never seen in all post-war, post-war being post-1945, not post like Blair, you know. Post, I know how you define what post-war is. That it's something I don't think we've seen in practically anyone who's alive in Scotland would have ever seen something like this degree of political engagement. And I want to tell you a wee bit about how I got here, and about the reference points of my parents, which I think are actually representative of a whole swathe of contemporary Scotland. In actual fact, in my book, Caledonian Dreaming, which I thought, you know, you do feel a wee bit of a risk sometimes talking about personal things, is I talked about my parents because we're all made up of those backgrounds, and that they matter. You don't just suddenly become, you know, the blether in public, or even if you're John Curtis, you know, you do not become born a psephologist and an expert. There's the story and a set of reasons to that. So my parents, Jean and Eddie, were born in Dundee, and they're fairly representative of that working class experience in the late 50s, 60s, early 70s. They had secure jobs, they had rising living standards, and they had, you know, a good quality of life that was getting better year in, year out. But there was something more important, I think, well, obviously not more important than that, but something deeper underneath that, and that was that they believed society was getting fairer. They believed for their kid, me, and for all the kids they knew, we were going to have more opportunity, more choice. You know, you stuck in at school, you didn't get a dead-end job, etc. And they believed the future was getting better. They believed people collectively together were making the future, and that wasn't something that was exceptional to my childhood or many of the people I knew. And maybe to some of you, this seems strange now, particularly some of the people who grew up after 79, it won't be to all of you. All of that was synonymous with Britain. And my parents really, in a way, they believed in Britain. So again, this is not unusual. I can just remember in my childhood when the EEC, as it was, the European Economic Union, the European Economic Community then, the referendum in 1975, my parents voted against it because they believed, from a left-wing perspective, it was a capitalist club. All these countries didn't have the potential of socialism like Britain, and that was quite a wide view. And when the Scottish Assembly first referendum came along in 1979, they voted against it. You see, it wasn't just Labour politicians, past, Tam Dael, you know, the Brian Wilsons, present, Joanne Lamonts, that voted against the Scottish Assembly in 1979. There's a whole section of the Scottish left because they believed in Britain. And so there have been many journeys, you know, over the last 30, 40 years, and many journeys still to travel. And I think that constituency, our grandfathers, our grandmothers, our fathers and mothers, and our wider families, there's something going on about how Scotland has changed in those last 30, 40 years. And I think that generational story is part of the story of where we've got to today. And one of the things that's changed since my parents believe in Britain, and many of you believe in Britain, is that Britain really doesn't work for most people, for most working people. It's one of the most unequal countries in the Western world. You know, we debate whether it's the fourth or the sixth most unequal, because Murdo Fraser's got this view, we're only the sixth most unequal country in the Western world. So, you know, that's a kind of the centre-right, thoughtful Scottish Tory view, trying to move us 2 places towards an egalitarian future. We're one of the most indebted countries in the Western world in terms of the leading economies. Only Japan, as a percentage of GDP, has more debt. And we're one of the most imbalanced regionally. London, as you know, 12% of the population, 22% of GDP, and rising. And this isn't just about the coalition, it isn't just about 30 years of what Labour governments did or didn't do. It's about long-term direction of Britain and long-term factors about the nature of the city, how the city is linked into kind of legacy of empire, tax havens. I did a conversation 2 years ago with Douglas Alexander where we agreed to keep on very nice terms. And in it, I had to explain to him why the centre of Britain was an imperial centre because of the links to the empire and city. And if you think about that, whatever you might think about Douglas Alexander, he is one of the more well-read Labour MPs who should know a wee bit of history, even if you disagreed with his politics. And I had to make that case out to him, that this was an imperial centre profoundly linked to inequality around the world. And I think the case, as Scotland is changing, and indeed as Britain is changing, and indeed as Britain's changing partly, some of it because of this debate, is the case for change, I think, has been increasingly made in Scotland and even across the UK. We have something to do, we can do about it. But the means for achieving that change haven't yet fully been agreed. I think the what and the why of change, if you think about it, increasingly are a given. But the issue is the how. How do we change? How does Scotland have, what degree of self-government do we have in the Union? And now, if you're a non-nationalist, as I am, and I mean non-nationalist with a small n, I don't mean necessarily just not a member of SNP, there's a whole set of debates you have to think about here. One of them is the solution of, wouldn't it be nice if we just federalised everything and then we'd all get on with each other? Now that's actually a very nice, tidy, rational argument. Unfortunately, just unfortunately, you know, it doesn't really correspond with the kind of reality of Britain. It's not achievable in the short term, to the medium term, to most of our lives basically, you know, that we can see on the horizon. There isn't a demand for an English Parliament, there isn't a demand for English regionalism. So federalism can't happen just because we, you know, are a part of Scottish opinion, would like to remake the Union. Federalism implies, not just implies, says that Westminster has to fundamentally reform. The British state has to fundamentally reform. Now, the British state actually has a wee bit of adaptivity. Some nationalists get mad when you say this a bit. But, you know, we did get Scottish Parliament, but we eventually voted for it in enough numbers, and we did get an independence referendum. But it's a very, very slow process, and in lots of other ways the British state is bastardising, hollowing out, etc. You know, as I would say to Labour people, you know, 100 years, well, 100 years plus of trying to debate abolishing the House of Lords from 1909, and you know, well, if on existing trends we get there about, I don't know, 25 centuries time when we finally, you know, get rid of the hereditary lords. The great argument of Mark Thomas that, you know, if any of you are just sitting there thinking, you know, about abolishing the British monarchy in your head, that's an offence under British law, under the 1848 Treason Felony Act. Just to imagine the end of the British monarchy is still an offence. And of course it could be abolished, but they're not getting around to it any time soon. So I don't think this debate is about us not voting Tory, you know, we didn't like Margaret Thatcher, you know, the whatever Tony Blair got up to and these wars. It's not, I think, actually about our past or being defined by our past. Clearly the past matters, but put it this way, this debate is not about the 700th anniversary of Bannockburn or other things, or 1320. The nation or the state that is obsessed about the past is the United Kingdom. You know, I mean, look at it, D-Day, World War I, World War II. Next year we have Magna Carta and George Osborne's sponsored party, seriously, to celebrate the 200th anniversary of Waterloo. It's not an accident. As Britain's got more unequal, you know, the past, an imagined version of the past, rises up I often think a bit like a United Kingdom version of Michael Jackson's Thriller video, you know, where the zombies come back to kind of like, you know, torture us basically. It would be funny if it wasn't sort of true, you know. And I think this debate is about democracy, but a wider sense of democracy than just voting. It's about Scotland changing in ways that is about much wider than the constitutional debate. It is about a society that was once quite hierarchical, you know, the power of the kirk in the 19th century, and that leaves quite a lot of people, I think, without the reference points in society, the institutions that used to define them, and makes them feel a wee bit of a sense of loss. And I think that debate, actually, that changing Scotland, aided us getting into this debate, and we do have to understand that those points back which people understood their identity, their lives have gone for lots of people. You know, it's not just RBS, Rangers, the Catholic Church. You know, Church of Scotland will be on existing trends gone in 30 years. So the Labour Party, the BBC, the institutions that defined us are declining in huge ways. And I think the debate's also about, it's kind of about the psychology of us, about how we address hopes and fears, because fears are a legitimate part of human life, and the emotions. And Fintan O'Toole, the Irish writer, he wrote a great foreword in my book called The Art of Growing Up. And before he did that, what inspired me to ask him was he'd written a piece looking at the Irish experience of independence after the crash. You know, like, you look at the mess you've made, you know, it's terrible. And then the consequences for that on the Scottish debate. And he said something that I think gets straight to the nub of this debate. He said, if you just get my right vision here, said, the options are not economic misery under the Union or permanent boom times under independence. They lie more in the realm of collective psychology. Do you want to have the safety net of an allied enemy to rage at when policies don't work and the world turns mean? Or do you prefer to look at yourself in the mirror in all your glories and in all your stupidities? And I think that's what it's about. It's about, of course the economy matters, of course the £1,400 versus the £1,000 matter, of course people feeling economic confidence, prosperity matter. But that's about looking for certainty in a world that is filled with all sorts of uncertainty and instability. Underlying all that is the fact, the longer, the deeper question of the issue of responsibility, both individual and collective. Do we feel mature enough to actually grow up and look at ourselves and actually say some of the decisions we've made or our elites have made in our name are actually pretty shaming? You know, our health inequalities, our education inequalities, 1 in 5 kids leaving school, you know, illiterate. That is shaming. And so that's a big jump. And actually it's quite difficult for some of us because nobody offered you a choice, you know, growing up when you were a kid. It just happened. So, you know, say, take more responsibility. Yeah, in an insecure, frightening world, a world where there's nothing that's absolutely sure, it's a bit scary. But what I think is that power is shifting in Scotland. It's shifting also in the UK, from London to Edinburgh. That's not enough. There has to be a way in which this debate is about more than politicians, in which independence is about more than, I think, the dreaded lines of full powers of the Parliament. Because I actually want to live in a Scotland where the Parliament has less, not more powers, where power is diffused, held throughout Scotland, and the institutions are accountable. And that's not exactly a utopia, that's a real, fully fledged democracy. So just to conclude, last week, maybe some of you were there in Edinburgh, the UK's foremost expert on inequality, Professor Danny Dorling of Oxford University, a man who basically comes as close to saying he's going to support yes as he can, and believes that, you know, this is one way of challenging the concentration of power in the United Kingdom. He said in his lecture, he said, if I were to ask the Scots to answer one question in this debate, it would be this, and I think it's a great one. He said, how much do you believe we can trust each other? How much can we trust each other? And I think that's brilliant because it's simple and it's powerful. It's about us, it's about all of us, it's not about yes or no, it's not about us or them, it's all of us as a society and a community and a people. It's about how we relate to each other. It's about how we build relationships and have an emotional and social intelligence, about how we understand our opponents. I'm sorry, I do not believe we are in an abusive relationship with England. I think those are terrible, terrible remarks in terms of politics. We have been in a relationship that has worked in some ways and hasn't worked in other ways. But actually, we are a product of that union because it's not been a kind of black and white scenario. In actual fact, in terms of marriage, because we do tend to define it as about the Scots and the English, as a Plaid Cymru Member of Parliament said, actually, there's 4 people in the marriage. So, you know, it's going to be complicated, but it's actually a set of relationships that we've grown. There was love in it once, I think, and kind of we've grown out of it. But abusive, no, it hasn't been. I think it's about the prospect and the capacity of us to change. I think it's about us saying the status quo is not good enough, fails so much of Scotland. Parts of our society are actually a broken society, and believing we can do that, we can bring about change. And so for those reasons, because my parents' version of Britain, Labour Britain, is dead, because I believe in the capacity of my fellow Scots to bring about change, and because I believe we can actually be a new democracy and a better society and culture, those are just some of the reasons why I'm voting yes on September 18th. Thank you.